and I'm so glad that you could join us today for Art Center Live. We are continuing to talk with various artists whose work right now is in our members only show in our main gallery. It's a fabulous show, and I encourage you to come on down to 1010 Winterberry Drive and check it out for yourself. Now, I want to introduce my guest for today, Gordon McLaughlin, and we actually have his artwork right behind me. Hi, Gordon, how are you?
Hi, Kyle. I'm
Um,
good.
I know you have two pieces, but we picked this one. I know that it is actually photography. It's sometimes hard for people to tell on the camera. Can you tell us a little bit about this piece of work?
Yes, this is a bird portrait type photograph. It has been slightly altered background wise. It's done on metal material, printed on metal. I did it in along Highway 41, right along the road. And these are roseate spoonbills, probably the most beautiful bird in Southwest Florida in terms of birds that are common. And you'll see pictures of them in every art show that you see. But this is a pair, and they happen to be in a group of about 12. And I carved them out by zooming in a little bit, but they tend not to pay as much attention to you if there's a large bird group as opposed to just two. So if you walk up on two birds, they'll be gone. But if you walk up on 10 or 12, they're usually not paying much attention to whoever's nearby. Um, and in this particular image, this is the original photograph. The only thing that's been done to it is the background has been blurred, much like you can do with lenses sometimes, but not at this distance. So it's been blurred in Photoshop to de-emphasize the background, which is somewhat distracting. Particularly the darker background was distracting in this particular picture. So that's a sort of an artistic liberty that you can do with photography in Photoshop, but this is the original image. Nothing's been added or detracted. It's just that the background has been blurred.
Well, it is beautiful. Now, you just said it's on. I'm going to touch it if that's okay. I know we always tell the children, look with your eyes, not with your hands. But you said this is metal. Can you talk a little bit about choices that photographers have in terms of how they're going to display their work? I mean, years ago we had 35 millimeter cameras and it was film, and you had it printed on photo paper and maybe put it in a frame, and that was about it. And now I know, because we have lots of photographers whose work we have here in our galleries, and the work comes in all sorts of different mediums or different kinds of substances. So can you tell us a little bit about the choices photographers have when they take their images and they decide to have them printed?
Sure. So basically, there are four common media that we still use: uh, paper and canvas, which you see a lot. Paper is print paper, just like you run through your paper at home or your printer at home. And it can be glossy, it can be matte, satin, there are a variety of finishes. Those are still very common, usually framed, usually matted, and often covered by glass. Then canvas is more popular recently, is very durable, relatively inexpensive, can be wrapped around an unfinished wood frame that is also relatively inexpensive. The next medium is metal. So this is actually a print on aluminum. The process is slightly different, but it's still the same ink. It's actually pressed on with a large press instead of run through a printer head. And there are basically two types at this point that I'm familiar with. Well, three actually. You can print on chrome. There are companies that print on chrome. And for automobiles, that is fabulous because chrome looks like chrome in the picture. Most people print on aluminum. This is aluminum. And I would note that there is a form of this aluminum that's available for outdoor use. So you can have a metal print that will work on your lanai or outdoors. It is impervious to water and UV light, so it's very durable. The last form is acrylic, And acrylic is basically a combination of two layers of the print behind an acrylic surface. And you can do a large print like this, and it's a relatively heavy
Yeah.
picture. It also can be made into hot plates and things like that. That's how they do those, and they use a type of acrylic that's impervious to heat. Now, the price wise, a print on paper without a frame, but a print on paper is, let's say, $25. Then a canvas will be about 50, metal will be about 100, and acrylic will be about 200. So
Okay.
each one doubles the price roughly. And
That's
that's,
very interesting. We have one of our artists whose work is in our gift gallery, and you were talking about hot plates. She's doing photography, and I now that I think about it, it's got to be acrylic, and they use them for cutting boards.
yes.
So it's that kind of durable. I did not put two and two together. That's really interesting. So tell me, let's learn a little bit about you. How did you get involved with photography? Is this something you've always done, or is this something you've done more recently? What sort of has been your artistic journey?
Well, by occupation, I'm a radiologist, and in the years way back, all of our images were on film, of course, and had to be run through a processor. And we used slides, we made slides of those X-ray pictures for teaching purposes and for conference purposes and so on and so forth. All were usually converted in 35 millimeter slides. So my first camera was a 35 millimeter, little 35 millimeter camera that I could take pictures of X-rays on through with a view box and use for conferences. So anyway, and we actually had a processor in our department that would process black and white, and we could run not the regular 35 millimeter film, but a special 35 millimeter film that we had, we could run through a processor in our hospital department. So it was interesting. I took way too many, obviously, but I really got into it. And so from there, I got interested in um, taking pictures outside my occupation. And I had a friend, and ultimately in about 1982, I went to my first course in Tucson and ran into a couple of great instructors. One was John Shaw, who was a master of macro photography, yeah, and wrote a book, Close-Ups in Nature, which was sort of the photographer's guide for many years. And Pat OHara, who was a Northwest U.S. photographer professional who did a lot of photography in the national parks and in Alaska. And I befriended Pat with a friend of mine who was from Indiana, and we traveled with him. He sort of became our mentor for years, and we would travel with him all over the country to photograph in my spare time, which was usually once a year. So anyway, but it was a great friendship. He's still lives in Port Angeles in Washington, and we talk once in a while.
Well, in terms then of subject matter, what I'm seeing is that it's really nature, regardless of where you are, whether you're down here in Florida or in Indiana or wherever you may be traveling, that you gravitate to, that your artistic eye is drawn to. Why do you think that? And what are some of the interesting challenges that you have in photographing the natural world?
Well, I have always liked outdoors and parks, and I've actually worked with the Nature Conservancy in Indiana and DNR a little bit, done some photography for them. But my wife and I both like outdoors. I grew up on a small farm, and so I liked animals, and ultimately birds got my attention. And I've photographed in Michigan and Indiana and mainly in Southwest Florida. But I think I like the challenge of birds and their beauty, and particularly in Florida. There's nothing like the wading birds in Florida. Nothing has so much color, and there are all kinds of activities. They're large birds, so they're easy to photograph from some distance, as opposed to robins or blue jays and things of that sort. And they're just sort of magnificent creatures, very unique.
Well, these are beautiful birds. Clearly, the roseate spoonbills were something that appealed to you. You're talking about birds. I mean, the difference between birds up north and down here. But of every bird you've ever photographed, what was your favorite? What photo of a bird was the one where you said, "This is the one"?
Well, I like, I mean, I love eagles. I don't do a lot of eagles, but eagles are just magnificent birds. And they're a challenge to get great pictures of flying and landing and this, that, and the other thing. And there are quite a few down here. But I have some pictures of some eagles down on 41 and that I've taken that are, I think, some of the best. I also like the the egrets and the herons are also great birds. Black ibis are beautiful,
Mm.
but I think honestly the most I think striking pictures are rosettes when they're flying or landing. They're just nothing that has the color that those have. I don't think.
Yeah. It's pink, one of my signature colors. I like it. Totally approve. Now, in terms of photography, you talk about starting back in a time where people were using 35 millimeter film. Clearly, you're not shooting with 35 millimeter film now. I would guess. I could be wrong, but I'm going to assume that you were using a camera that's taking digital images. Talk to me a little bit about that evolution because that's sort of a change if you are a photographer who didn't start out with a digital camera. I mean, now everybody's a photographer. Everybody's got it on their phone. I know for me, my first camera was like a Canon, and I used that for years, and really didn't get a digital camera for quite some time because it just didn't feel the same to me. Talk to me a little bit about your transition.
Well, I'm a little bit techie. My friend from Indiana that I've photographed with for many years traveling is he's more of the artistic side, composition side. I'm a little more in the camera. So I got into digital in my profession happened and I had to happen with it. So the same thing in photography. I jumped to digital fairly quickly. However, I must say it was hard, when you took uh, film images for 15 to 20 years and you get it ingrained in your mind that that's the best. And so digital has to prove itself to most people, most photographers who have been photographers for 40 years. They had to prove to themselves that the digital images were as good. And so I would say for the last 10 to 15 years, the digital images have been as good as film and now better. And of course I also like instant gratification, which I would go on a trip and take 30 rolls of film and come back and not get them back for 5 days and didn't know what I'd done. And of course now I'm looking through the films just as soon as I take or the images just as soon as I take them. So I suppose that's spoiling photographers, but and it tends to make you shoot more images to cover spending as much time as you should sometimes or as you could on each individual image. But for flying birds, it's great.
Again, I think that there's a certain cost efficiency because I can remember taking lots of pictures and spending money to get everything developed and getting them back and having one out of many that I shot that was the one that I was looking for. Here, yes, you can shoot a lot, and what you don't like, you just delete. You're not having to print. And I know we do photography classes here for young people, and that's I've seen that with them as they use their cameras. But there's been a sort of debate between the art of photography and people saying, well, it's not, you're clicking and there it is. We take it to be developed, even if you're doing some digital manipulation or changes within it. There have been people who, and I don't agree with this, there are people like, well, it's not art like people doing oil painting or the time spent and it's an original piece. Granted, everybody makes prints, but talk to me about what makes photography an art for you. I know for me it is the eye and what you see and how you capture it. And I know I can take pictures to catalog things or to make sure we know events that have happened. But I'm not artistic with a camera. I know that my eye just doesn't see things that way. What do you feel is sort of the artistry in photography?
Well, I think it's in, not to use a trite saying, but it's in the eye of the beholder, to be honest with you. So I have my own eye, and I have evolved a certain thing that I like in images and a style. And I actually will trend. This is something, these birds were done in something I've only been doing with the background blurs, excuse me, for maybe a year or two. Um, and I was pretty traditional coming from film. I was thinking I need to see what the environment the bird is actually in. I think that's part of the meaning of the image. But as I've got sort of progressed, I've decided there. So this image I have without the background blur, and I like it just as well as this image. But they have two different effects when you look at them, and this one draws your eye to the birds more, and because there's less distraction in it. But I will say I think that has been harder for people who photographed in the past to transition to accepting the manipulations that can be done with photographs and still thinking that they're just as good. Hangers on would say, well, you really didn't work as hard as I did, or it's not really the right environment, that kind of thing. But I think that that train left the station. There's all kinds of things that can be done with photographs to mimic oil paint or whatever it is. And sometimes they look quite good done that way. I have a friend that does all his photographs and uses the oil paint filter in Photoshop on many of them. And it doesn't look like an oil painting exactly, but it has a different appearance, and it's very interesting. So I think it was hard initially for me to get away from the old traditional way of looking at birds, for example, as opposed to, say, somebody who is 25 years old picking up a digital camera and is exposed to all the things that can be done from the graphic standpoint in Photoshop. I don't think they think a thing about it, what the image, they don't have a preconceived notion of what the image should look like.
It's the final product is really what they're looking at, and they're using, digital media has given us so many more tools that can be used in creating art.
Right. I'll do 25 pictures after a week of shooting, and I'll pick my favorite 25 out of 100, and I'll show them to my wife, and she'll pick 25 completely different ones that she likes. So it's like it's hard to predict what people like, an individual.
Art is to some extent subjective, and it's what touches you, what attracts you. When you have a emotional or visceral response to something you see, we see it with people in the gallery. They come in, they look at a piece, and that's the one they have to have. There's something about it that speaks to them. But my last question that I want to ask you about, you talked a little bit about taking courses early on, but who or what has been sort of, and it can be more than one, major influence on your artwork?
Well, I mentioned I'd gone to a class in Tucson. I went actually to an in-person class, and which wouldn't be possible last year. Yeah, so there were two photographers there, and one was just a gentleman, and shared openly everything he knew and all of his art forms and everything. And he was an excellent teacher. He'd actually been a teacher in a school and quit after 5 years. He was a biology major and went into photography, but it was Pat OHara, and he was just an excellent art form person when it comes to photography. What's artistic about this composition or that? He knew Photoshop backwards and forwards when he was an early adopter of those types of technologies. And he invited us out to his home in Port Angeles after that class about 2 years later, and took us everywhere, out there. And it was really our first, Mike Phelps and myself, our first exposure outside of Indiana. This was in the 80s. And it was just his attitude about sharing and appreciating what you're doing and what we were doing. He was gentle in the way he criticized, and he had written and published a lot, but he was a great person, and I always admired his personality and his artistic vision of things. And so, anyway, I would say he was my aspiration, so to speak.
Well, it certainly has come. Your journey has taken you through to some really fine results, and I know this piece as well as the one down in the gallery. Is there artwork that's behind you? Is that your artwork as well too?
It is. That's three gallinules. You probably can't see them very well. I love purple gallinules. I didn't mention them, but that's another beautiful bird. Not quite as large and easy to photograph as the rosettes. They're a little harder to find, but yes, that's a trio of gallinules. Yes.
Well, that is lovely. Well, Dr. McLaughlin, I would have done that at the beginning had I known. I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being a member here at the Marco Island Center for the Arts. Now more than ever, it's meant so much to those who have continued to be here, support us, allow us to try and support the artists through what we can do in our galleries, in our gift galleries, through our classes and workshops. So we thank you. I want to take a moment for my friends out there. Tonight is one of our live music concerts. It is outside in our courtyard. We have Kindred Spirit performing at 5:30. It's bluegrass music, and I wasn't sure it was my cup of tea, and I have to tell you, I heard them, and I'm now a convert to bluegrass music. So if you've got some time, 5:30, come on down. We still have seats that are available. It's $25 for members, 30s for non-members. And we also want to remind you that we are in the process of filling our space time capsule. We have our big space capsule that is outside that looks like the Friendship 7, and in it goes our time capsule, and we are looking for what you, all of our friends and members of the community and community at large, can send to us. So the topic for right now for our online request is images of what you think where you live is going to look like in 2070. So if you're on Marco, you can drop it off here. If you're not on Marco, you can email it to info@marcoislandart.org, O-R-G. Send us your images, and your name will go into a drawing, and we're going to pull it out. And I'm already thinking of some fabulous prizes. So send your stuff, launch your voice into the future, create your own legacy, because we need you to make it what it needs to be. Thank you again, Gordon. It was a pleasure having you with us today. To all my friends out there, you know how special you are to us. You are our art family here at the Art Center, and we strive every day to be what? Your art home. Have a great afternoon, everybody.